One of the lessons that we learn about from the Holocaust is a renewed attention to the bystander, really like never before. We presume in our own lives today that bystanders have a certain obligation to intervene whenever necessary to help a victim in distress. But that hasn't always been the case. Bystanders have often been seen as merely onlookers, passersby, invisible for the most part, or at most just observers to an event. But in fact, we begin to understand that the incrimination or the condemnation of bystanders is a relatively recent phenomenon and started primarily during the Nazi era, when survivors began to report through their diaries and other means precisely the stress that they are experiencing. And they demanded that bystanders who had the latitude, the freedom to intervene, to take action. Turns out that as early as 1935, we begin to hear from Jewish leaders, once the Nazis had taken power, that in fact there is a demand for intervention. And we begin to look at memoirs of survivors as they were published in the 1960s and begin to see that that theme, the sense of abandonment, was very much a part of their story. And so we get into the 60s and understand that the idea of the bystander as an agent with responsibility begins to take hold in the larger culture. So not only do we have memoirs written by survivors, but we have the sensational Kitty Genovese case that some of you might be well aware of, when one evening in 1964, a young woman was stabbed on a street relatively well trafficked and across the street from an apartment building out of which many residents could well have heard and certainly have seen what was happening. And the story unfolded that nobody got involved. And so the whole bystander issue became quite dramatically discussed, and the incrimination of the bystander begins at that point to take hold. There's a great deal of research on bystanders today, the bystander effect being one of those results. But most bystander research tries to explain or explain away bystander inaction. When we listen to the survivors, however, we understand that bystander incrimination is unconditional, and the demand for intervention, therefore, is necessary. Thanks for your attention. I hope this was helpful.